And while it's nothing new to have ex-military men coming out of the woodwork to talk about UFOs and telling amazing tales of the things they've seen on the inside, from bodies to battles at underground bases, these events still make for noteworthy milestones on the road to the big reveal if we ever get there. And what is there exactly? Should we expect to be greeted by some galactic federation of light or initiated into a dark legion of deceptive demons? Maybe they're plasma beings from a dimension next door or the alien orchestrators of some cosmic Lord of the Flies experiment. Or might recent revelations have more mundane motivations, like being designed to prop up military industrial complex budgets? Or might they be a pressure test for their technocratic takeover and narrative control? Many people think about disclosure as a single explosive event just over the horizon, but I suspect it'll happen so slowly and methodically as to almost appear boring. And we might wake up on the other side realizing we know maybe all we're ever gonna know, because perhaps these aren't answers anyone can ever definitively deliver to us in some gift-wrapped complete package. But we still keep tabs on the dripping faucet of disclosure because it's part of the job, and recently we had the 1-2 punch of whistleblower David Grush's claims, as well as a new Disclosure Project press conference from Stephen Greer, highlighting several highly credentialed military men talking about their own strange experiences firsthand. And when we have new chapters in the never-ending story, I make a call to the best of the best to help us assess it appropriately, and of course the king of that hill is the great Richard Dolan, the military historian and UFO investigator extraordinaire. He's the author of 2 volumes of UFOs in the National Security State, which comprise the most detailed history on the subject I've ever found, as well as other great books like AD After Disclosure, The Alien Agendas, and UFOs for the 21st Century Mind, which was recently re-released in a new and expanded edition with over 60 pages of additional content. On top of his UFO work, Richard also wrote and hosted a 10-part series on the history of false flag events for Gaia TV, and currently you can find him doing the Richard Dolan Show weekly, as well as providing ongoing content to his subscribers at richarddolanmembers.com. Let's get into it. The dedicated disclosure detective, technocracy tracker, and bright mind for our strange and troubled times. Richard, welcome back.
Thank you, Greg. That was one of the most impressive introductions I've ever heard.
Too kind.
You laid it on pretty thick there, but thank you very much. That was very, very kind of you.
You got it. It's hard to get people's attention these days, so we do what we can.
Yeah.
And I am super fortunate to have you here every so often. I really appreciate your work and time. I heard that David Grush interview and saw the latest Disclosure Project press conference and thought that together they seemed like a big enough reason to bother you about coming back. Not a bad couple of weeks to be in the UFO business, right?
No, fascinating. By the way, I've always enjoyed every one of our interviews in the past, so it's nice to be back here with you. Yeah, it's interesting. The UFO, UAP now, field had a lot of shocking bits of information over the last several years, of course. The whole David Grush thing that came out actually over a month ago now. That was June 5th, I'm seeing in our interview. It's more than a month after that. So it's interesting. And I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop. We had the Grush thing. That was first with the article in the debrief. I think, Leslie Kane, Ralph Blumenthal did that on June 5th. And at the same time, we get his interview with Ross Coulthard coming out. And it's interesting. We can get to the Greer press conference as well, but I'm just thinking in terms of Grush, how everything in the UFO community is now just absolutely divided. And I find it very curious. Like, I remember 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, you'd go to a UFO conference and the frustration within our community was always palpable. And frequently people would say, my goodness, can't some government insider just come forward and spill the beans? I mean, this was something that people asked all the time. This was not a trivial question. And then I find when they come out, half the community is throwing rotten tomatoes and broken glass at them and trying to take them down or saying this is disinformation, as if there's never ulterior motives or anything. There's always ulterior motives. But when I look at the claims that have come out, not just Grush, but people like Lou Elizondo, who preceded him. And, the main thing that I want to know is this true? What is true? And is there anything that's a lie or a deception? People love to discuss motivations all the time. I think that's a very dangerous game to get into the head of someone else. It's a great way to break a friendship apart. It's a great way to destroy a marriage. It's also a great way to destroy social conversations. That is, by constantly questioning the motivations of the person you're trying to communicate with. So I'm not saying we don't want to be aware of that, but for me, the number one thing always to do is to listen to the information, the data, check it as best we can, find out, does this appear to be true or not true? Is this new information that is coming to our community, our society, that we can work with? And yes, there's motivations. Everyone wants to be a star. Everyone wants whatever they want. But the question is this true? And when I look at what Grush has been saying, I certainly am not seeing anything that strikes me as a lie. Not yet, anyway. It's only been about a month. I'm not seeing anything that strikes me as anything other than what he appears, honestly, to believe and what he appears to have been told within his proper security clearances, which are very, very significant, by the way. So all of that, like I say this because I have a number of friends and colleagues who have said this is just another CIA op or another intelligence community op. My question always is, what's the op? Is this to get us running to the military industrial complex? And invariably, that's what people will usually fall back to. And, I'm a lot more interested at this point in finding out what is true and what is not true. And so far, I'm not seeing false flag here. I'm just going to put that out there. I've studied false flags a lot. I'm not saying I'm the final word, but from my perspective, there's a lot of opportunity for self-motivated, self-serving statements. Would never deny that, but as an actual false flag, I'm not on board with that argument yet.
Yeah, it seems lofty to me. It's in the mix, people talk about it, but an alien false flag, I don't know they need to go that far. They're very good at drumming up a villain, some human organization that they could say we need to wage war against. So I don't know if they need to go to space just yet.
I agree.
But
Yeah.
you are right that a lot of people are talking about Grush. It's been about a month. We both have our schedules. So, something like this happens. And then I try to, book an interview to talk about it. But it is bittersweet because you have people like Marco Rubio saying, well, there are many more whistleblowers. He's not the only one. We've talked to him behind closed doors. They're going to be coming out. So even I was hoping maybe something blew up in between the time of booking this and it actually occurring. But what makes you special is that in the UFO community, you are also aware of the technocratic lockdown operation. That's really what we talked about mainly last time. But the UFO community seems to think, at least half of them, that UFOs are the only thing that the state is dodgy and deceptive about. When it comes to a lot of other stuff, they might put their trust there, which is odd because they're so kind of selective about where deception might be. But another angle I've heard you talk about recently is the prospect for narrative control, that this might be coming out not just to prop up a military industrial complex budget, but it might be kind of a test case of how that digital narrative control apparatus is working. And that's a really interesting take.
Yeah, I think you put it really well. We're in an era of, I think, potentially permanent narrative control by a centralized state power, and that state is international in scope at this point. So as a society, as a civilization, we've got some very, very big challenges ahead of us in terms of maintaining our intellectual independence from the state, to say nothing of freedom of opinion. So that's a danger. I agree. In terms of taking it back to the UFO community and the idea of disclosure, I think what you say is true. I think there's an enormous part of UFO research that is politically out to lunch. I'll just say it. I don't think that there's a lot of astute analysis when you get beyond the UFO phenomenon. And I mean, we all just went through the whole lockdown phenomenon, which I think is an enormous crime against our entire species. And they got away with it, and they're getting away with it. I call this part of the global revolution, which we are in the middle of. This is I don't hear people talking about this as a revolution, but what we have been dealing with for the past several years is absolutely a very well coordinated, breathtakingly effective global revolution to transform human society in a huge array of dramatic ways. So that's a problem. And I just think the UFO community is totally out to lunch on that. They're not really following this. So that's one problem. In terms of digging into the matters of the UFO or UAP phenomenon, similarly, I think that there's a lot of emphasis on the one hand, you've got the eternal optimists. I just had a very long series of conversations with my friend, Stephen Bassett. I mean, I love Steve like a brother. He's much, much more optimistic about the disclosure process than I have ever been. Of course, that's been the case for over 2 decades now. And I respect Steve, but there is this kind of optimistic side of the disclosure narrative where, folks are really, really hopeful that statements by people like Grush or previously by Lou Elizondo or Eric Davis or Christopher Mellon, that this is going to push us toward congressional hearings, which is the real goal that I think a lot of these folks have. Bassett, in fact, said to me, like, hearings are, virtually certain now to happen. When I spoke with him, he made a very impassioned case for that. But whether that will happen or not it's always an open question. As you were just saying earlier, Gresh came out, we had a full head of steam for a little while, and then it just petered out. And where is this now? Doesn't mean that the initiative is gone. But whether this is going to go anywhere is a whole other question. And the other things that are happening is I'm constantly concerned about the questions we are not asking relating to this phenomenon. And maybe we can get into that later. But I feel like I'm a voice alone in the wilderness, just saying there is a global phenomenon that goes on every single day that involves, as far as I can estimate, a potentially massive number of craft and beings that are involved in this. Far, far more than we are reporting, in my view. And we really never talk about this. We don't talk like what's actually going on. It's important to talk about acquired technology and bodies. I agree. That's extremely important. But we're really almost not even talking about that, frankly. But then the fact is, who are they and what are they doing right now? This is still a very, to me, an incredibly important subject. And I hear no one in the UFO community research field, let alone the mainstream area, that is even broaching these matters. I think, our community is out to lunch. I've used that phrase a few times in the international geopolitical arena for sure. But even with, the areas of research that we should be talking about, I think that we've got a real problem with our priorities.
Right, right. Well, that's well said. And I mean, let's broach those things because we're throwing a little criticism at the UFO community. And like you said, you think they're not really talking about the most important things. You feel a bit isolated. And one of those things being the high amount of traffic right now and what they're up to right now. And I think that's because it's hard to know. I mean, I don't get a briefing on what the UFOs and the aliens are up to at this current moment. We usually have to look back, sometimes at previous decades or isolated cases to try to get a handle on it. But obviously, you're a little more plugged in than me. What are they up to right now? What is going on with the amount of traffic out there in the world?
Oh, yeah. Oh, well, thanks for letting me broach this. I'd like to get back to the things you wanted to start talking about. But in terms of the amount of traffic, I try to get a handle on this because globally, there's really only one region of the world that accurately, or at least attempts to record the amount of UFO sightings that occur, and that's North America. So here we have 2 fundamental databases. There's the National UFO Reporting Center, which is public, totally open source, everything, anyone can go there. And that's run by Peter Davenport, who's done this for years. And that website will record anywhere from 5 to 6 to maybe even up to 8,000 raw sightings per year. And 95+% of those are in North America. Not surprising. It's basically a US website. Some reports from elsewhere trickle in. And then the other major website in North America is the MUFON management system that they have there. So, and that similarly gets about 5,000 plus reports a year. No one really knows how much overlap. No one's really done detailed data analyses of both of these sites that I'm aware of. But I think we're talking minimum 10,000 raw reports a year in North America. That doesn't include a couple of thousand you get out of Canada from University of Manitoba with Chris Rutkowski up there. So let's just say 10,000 raw reports in North America. Then you have to ask yourself, how many people see UFOs without reporting them? That's a large number. What is the percentage of North America vis-a-vis the rest of the world? Well, that's US and Canada is still less than 5% of the global population. And so I've tried to look through these numbers many, many times and to sort of estimate what I think is the likely amount of traffic. And then, you have to say, well, from raw reports, how many of those are genuine anomalous craft? I mean, these are, very difficult to nail down, but that has not stopped me from trying repeatedly to get some kind of reasonable spitball estimate, if we can say, of what we're looking at. On top of that, there have been a number of polls over the years asking people, have you seen UFOs ever in your life? We've got data on that. And when I add all of these up, my conclusion is that we are very likely looking at millions of sightings over the last, 70, 80 years. And very likely, it wouldn't shock me at all to see over 100,000 sightings in the United States alone per year. In fact, I think it could be multiples of that. That doesn't mean that they're all aliens. So if you even take a 1% or you take a 0.1% worldwide, the way I shake it and bake it, I think we're still coming down to thousands of very, very strong UFO sightings around the world every year. So there's a lot going on. We're not really discussing it. Some of these sightings, as I often like to point out, or take place in your neighborhood or the listener's neighborhood. Dark craft, barely noticed, sometimes disc shaped, sometimes triangular, hovering at 200 feet over your home or your neighbor's home at 3 a.m. There's a lot of reports like that. The question is, what's that all about? There's a lot of very, very significant questions here. Who is operating these? What are they doing? Why are they doing what they're doing? Right now, I'm doing a book project on USOs. That's underwater or water-based UFOs. And I'm looking at a lot of these cases and, trying to understand the motivations of some of these craft. Some of them ocean-based, some are in large rivers, and they're seen coming out of rivers and zipping off somewhere. Why were they in a river? Where are they going to? I'm not saying that we are easily able to get answers here, but we really ought to be thinking about this and trying to puzzle this stuff out. That's one of the things that is interesting and important to me. And I do try to spend some time each week or each month really trying to think about this, because I do feel it's, we want to get our facts straight. But for me, I ask myself, what's the use of having the data if I'm not at least trying my best to puzzle this out and to ask, what does this picture look like? And again, one of the big things that I'm just saying is an enormous amount of traffic in the US, beyond the US, and practically no genuine, accurate data collection outside of North America on this matter. So we are woefully out of our depth here in dealing with a phenomenon that, think about it. Beings apparently of incredibly advanced capability, able to do things that we do not know how these are done, at least officially, operating and have been operating in secrecy for many decades. Why? Why secrecy? What is happening? Well, we've got claims of abductions, hybrids. That's totally legit to look into. But it's something that we're not really discussing. I don't know if I feel, you mentioned the word isolated. I might be a little strong, but I'm certainly used to being out on my own in talking about issues that I think are important and going a little bit against the grain, even within the UFO community, for sure.